Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you've lost your grip on reality, even though deep down you know exactly what happened? Maybe you replayed it in your mind 100 times, wondering if you overreacted, misunderstood, or just got too sensitive. That confusion you felt wasn't an accident. It was gaslighting, one of the most powerful psychological tools used in toxic relationships. And when it comes to female gaslighting, it can be even more subtle, even more calculated, and far more damaging than most people realize. But here's the truth. If you're an INFJ, you have a kind of radar that cuts through the fog. Where others second-guess themselves for months or even years, you start noticing the cracks in the story early. You pick up on the shifts in tone, the inconsistencies in memory, the way someone's words don't match their actions, and while it may not stop the pain, it gives you an advantage few people have: the ability to see gaslighting for what it really is, before it swallows you whole. Gaslighting isn't always obvious. Sometimes it looks like denial, like someone swearing they never said that. Other times it looks like laughter at your expense, minimizing your feelings by calling you dramatic. And sometimes it's silence, the refusal to acknowledge what you know to be true. For most people, these tactics are devastating because they chip away at reality itself. But INFJs, you have an edge. You might not call it out immediately, but deep down you already know something's off. You feel it in your body before your mind fully catches up. That's what makes this video so important. We're going to break down the exact tactics female narcissists and manipulators use to gaslight, and more importantly, why INFJs are the ones who often untangle them first. If you've ever been told you're imagining things, if you've ever felt like your memory can't be trusted, or if you've ever walked away from someone feeling drained and confused, then what we're about to cover will finally make sense of it. By the end of this video, you won't just understand how gaslighting works, you'll see how your INFJ mind has been protecting you all along, even when you doubted yourself. You'll realize that your intuition wasn't wrong, it was never wrong. And that realization can be the first step to reclaiming your power. So don't click away, because the tactics we're about to uncover are things you've probably already faced, maybe without having the words for it. And once you do, you'll never look at certain conversations, relationships, or people the same way again. If you've ever wanted clarity, if you've ever wanted validation, you're in the right place. Stick with me, because this isn't just another video. This is your reminder that you are not crazy, you are not overreacting, and your ability to see the truth is exactly what makes you untouchable. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, not just for me, but for yourself. Because if you've been through gaslighting, you know how easy it is to forget your own power. These videos are here to remind you of what you already know deep inside: that you're stronger, sharper, and far more aware than anyone ever gave you credit for. 1. Subtle shifts in reality. Gaslighting rarely starts with something big or obvious. It doesn't come at you in the form of blatant lies right away. Instead, it begins with the smallest shifts, the kind of things that are so easy to dismiss in the moment. A female gaslighter might casually say, "I never said that," when you know for a fact she did. Or she might laugh off something serious by labeling it just a joke. These tiny alterations don't seem like much on their own, but strung together, they create a pattern that can quietly make you question your entire sense of reality. Most people don't catch these shifts because they're designed to fly under the radar. That's the whole point. They're subtle enough to slip past logic, but strong enough to plant doubt in your mind. You start second-guessing yourself. Did I really remember that correctly? Maybe I did overreact. Maybe it wasn't a big deal. That's the trap. The more you question yourself, the less you question the manipulator. But here's where you, as an INFJ, are different. You don't just listen to words. You pick up on tone, energy, and intention. You notice when someone's reaction doesn't match the weight of the situation. You catch those micro-expressions, that flicker of defensiveness in their eyes, the slight change in how they breathe when they deny something. It might sound small, but to you, these things scream louder than the words themselves. Your intuition starts ringing alarms long before most people even realize they're being manipulated. The danger of these subtle shifts is how they build over time. One denial leads to another, one joke cuts deeper, one dismissal leaves you feeling smaller. Weeks or months later, you may find yourself doubting not just one event, but your entire perception of the relationship. That's how gaslighting works. It's not about one conversation, it's about wearing you down piece by piece, until you don't trust yourself anymore. And yet, your INFJ mind has a built-in defense. You replay events in detail. While others shrug it off and move on, you analyze. You connect dots others miss. You remember the exact words, the mood in the room, the shift in their expression. You don't always call it out right away, but you store it. And that stored awareness becomes your shield. Even if the gaslighter convinces you in the moment, part of you already knows something doesn't add up. This is why INFJs often wake up from gaslighting before anyone else. You're not immune to the confusion, but your ability to sense patterns eventually exposes the game. Where others get lost in the fog, you start noticing that the truth you're being fed doesn't match what your intuition and memory are screaming at you. And once you see those cracks in the reality they're trying to build, you can't unsee them. So the next time you feel that tiny voice inside saying something isn't right here, listen to it. That's not paranoia. That's your intuition catching the subtle shifts in reality. It's your inner defense system kicking in before the manipulation takes root. And while it may not make the experience painless, it's the very reason why INFJs have a unique power. You can untangle the lie long before it fully traps you. 2. Emotional minimization. One of the most common gaslighting tactics female narcissists use is emotional minimization. It's when your feelings are not just dismissed, but shrunk down until they seem unreasonable, exaggerated, or even non-existent. She might say things like, "You're too sensitive," or "You always make a big deal out of nothing." At first, these comments might sound casual, even playful, but over time they chip away at your confidence in your own emotional responses. Here's why this tactic is so effective. Emotions are supposed to be your inner compass. They tell you when something feels wrong, when a boundary has been crossed, when someone's behavior is hurtful. But when those signals are constantly minimized, you begin to doubt the accuracy of that compass. Instead of trusting yourself, you start to hesitate. You wonder if maybe you are too sensitive. You ask yourself whether you're overreacting. And in that hesitation, the manipulator gains power, because the less you trust your emotions, the more you lean on her version of events. For most people, this tactic works for a long time. They get stuck in cycles of self-doubt, apologizing for feelings that were completely valid. But here's where INFJs stand apart. You don't just feel emotions on the surface. You process them deeply. You notice the difference between being triggered and being genuinely hurt. You can separate passing irritations from emotional wounds that stick. So when someone keeps telling you that what you felt was nothing, you recognize that inner dissonance. Your intuition and your heart both know it was something. This is why female gaslighters often find INFJs harder to break. You might stay quiet at first, letting them believe they've won the moment, but deep inside, you're cataloging every instance. You're asking yourself, if my feelings are always too much, why do they keep coming up in the first place? Why does my body tighten every time I'm dismissed? These questions lead you to the truth faster than most, because your empathy and intuition refuse to ignore pain, even when someone else tries to erase it. Another layer of emotional minimization is mockery. A female narcissist might laugh at your feelings, roll her eyes, or tell you you're dramatic. This isn't accidental, it's a calculated way to make you embarrassed about expressing yourself. If she can get you to suppress your emotions voluntarily, she no longer has to do the work of controlling you. You'll silence yourself before she even has to try. But again, INFJs eventually notice the game. You realize that the more you shrink yourself to avoid ridicule, the less of your authentic self remains. And that realization is often the spark that begins your quiet detachment. What makes this tactic especially damaging is that it can twist your relationships with others too. After being minimized enough, you might start minimizing yourself. You preface your feelings with lines like, "I'm probably overreacting, but," or "This might sound stupid, but." That's not who you really are. That's conditioning from repeated gaslighting. The good news is, once you identify the pattern, you can untangle it. You can reclaim your right to feel without apology. In the end, emotional minimization only works as long as you let someone else be the authority on your feelings. But when you remember that your emotions are signals, not flaws, you take that authority back. And that's exactly what INFJs excel at. You know your inner world better than anyone else, and once you stop giving someone permission to minimize it, their power over you collapses. Toward twisting your words against you, Another gaslighting tactic female narcissists often rely on is taking your own words and turning them into weapons against you. At first, it seems subtle. She might misinterpret something you said, spinning it into a version that benefits her. But over time, you notice a pattern. No matter how carefully you explain yourself, she manages to flip your words until you're the one at fault. Here's how it works. You share something vulnerable, like, I felt hurt when you dismissed me in front of your friends. Instead of addressing your pain, she might reply, so now you're saying I embarrass you all the time? You make me sound like a terrible person. Suddenly, the focus shifts. What started as your honest expression of hurt becomes an accusation she can attack, leaving you defending yourself instead of being heard. This tactic is powerful because it creates constant self-doubt. You start to question whether you said things the wrong way. You rehearse conversations in your head, thinking if only I'd explained it better, she wouldn't have twisted it. But here's the truth. It's not about how you say it. It's about control. Twisting your words ensures she never has to take responsibility. Instead, she keeps you stuck defending yourself, distracted from the original issue. Most people fall deep into this trap because they care about being fair, about not being misunderstood. And that's exactly why it works so well. But INFJs are different. You don't just listen to the words exchanged in a conversation, you track the intent behind them. You notice when the pattern repeats, how every time you bring up a real issue, it somehow becomes about your supposed flaws or failures. Your intuition catches the manipulation even when the surface logic seems convincing. You realize that if every disagreement somehow ends with you apologizing, the problem isn't your communication. It's the way she weaponizes it. Female narcissists often add another layer to this tactic: selective memory. They'll bring up something you said weeks or months ago, but distorted beyond recognition. Remember when you told me I was selfish? You've always thought that about me. You rack your brain trying to remember the conversation, realizing you never said it that way. Maybe you said you felt neglected or you asked for more balance, but now your original words are replaced with something harsher, something designed to make you look cruel. The danger here is that it forces you into a defensive position, scrambling to clarify what you really meant, while she stays firmly in control of the narrative. INFJs eventually cut through this with one powerful realization. The truth doesn't need constant re-explaining. If someone repeatedly twists your words despite your efforts to be clear, it's not a misunderstanding, it's manipulation. And that clarity is your shield. You start keeping track of the conversations in your own mind, sometimes even journaling them, so when the distortions come back around, you know exactly what was said and why. That inner record becomes proof that you're not forgetting or making things up, as she might claim. Twisting your words is meant to silence you. It's designed to make you so afraid of being misquoted that you eventually stop speaking up at all. But as an INFJ, silence doesn't mean surrender. It means observation. You step back, watch the pattern repeat, and the moment you recognize it for what it is, her weapon loses its power. Because once you see that your words are not safe in her hands, you stop handing them over so freely. You start guarding your truth, speaking less but with more clarity, and letting her manipulations expose themselves without your participation. 4. Projection and reversal. One of the most insidious gaslighting tactics a female narcissist uses is projection, taking her own flaws, mistakes, or toxic behaviors and pinning them on you. Instead of acknowledging her actions, she flips the script so suddenly that you end up carrying the guilt that should belong to her. It's psychological sleight of hand, and if you don't catch it, you'll spend years apologizing for things that were never yours to own. Picture this. She lashes out at you with harsh words during an argument, calling you selfish for needing time alone. The very next day, when you try to explain how hurtful it was, she says, "You're the one who's always selfish. You don't think about my needs." The shift is instant. Now you're scrambling to defend yourself, forgetting the fact that she was the one who originally crossed the line. The brilliance of projection is how believable it can feel in the moment. Because INFJs naturally self-reflect, you pause and think, could she be right? Am I really being selfish? That pause is exactly where she gains control. By reversing roles, she forces you into self-doubt and out of accountability mode. She no longer has to answer for her behavior. You're too busy questioning yourself. Reversal goes hand in hand with this tactic. Whenever you raise a valid concern, she turns the spotlight back on you, as if your reaction is the real problem. You say, "I feel dismissed when you ignore me during conversations." She replies, "See? This is why I can't talk to you. You always overreact." Suddenly, the issue isn't her dismissiveness anymore. It's your supposed sensitivity. The truth is buried under layers of deflection. What makes projection so damaging is that it creates an endless cycle where you become the scapegoat for her behavior. She cheats but accuses you of being unfaithful. She lies but insists you're dishonest. She manipulates but convinces you that you're the manipulative one. And because you care deeply about truth and fairness, you start defending yourself point by point, not realizing that the very act of defending is proof to her that the tactic is working. But here's where INFJs stand apart. You notice the pattern faster than most because you can separate intent from surface appearance. You realize that every time she's confronted, the same move happens. She projects her behavior onto you and avoids responsibility. The consistency of that reversal becomes the evidence. You may not call it out directly at first, but you log it in your mind, and over time, the weight of those observations becomes undeniable. This awareness gives you power. Once you see projection for what it is, you stop taking the bait. You no longer waste energy defending yourself against accusations that don't belong to you. Instead, you let her words hang in the air, refusing to pick them up as your burden. That silence is not weakness, it's clarity. You know the truth, and the truth doesn't need to be proven to someone who's determined to twist it. Projection and reversal are designed to confuse you into carrying guilt that isn't yours. But once you recognize it, the spell breaks. You start realizing that the accusations hurled at you are often nothing more than confessions in disguise. And with that knowledge, you shift the balance of power. She can project all she wants, but you won't absorb it anymore. 5. Withholding affection and approval. Another subtle but devastating gaslighting tactic a female narcissist uses is withholding affection and approval. Unlike open criticism, which you can clearly identify, this one hides in silence, coldness, and selective withdrawal. It's not about what she says, it's about what she doesn't give you. Think about it. When things are good, she showers you with charm, attention, and warmth. It feels validating, almost addictive, because you believe the connection is finally stable. But then without warning, she pulls it all back. Suddenly, the smiles, the affection, even the simple acknowledgement of your presence disappears. You're left confused, asking yourself, what did I do wrong? The silence becomes punishment, and you find yourself working harder just to win back what should have been given freely in a healthy relationship. This tactic works because it conditions you to associate approval with compliance. When you behave in ways that feed her ego or align with her control, she rewards you. When you push back, question her actions, or simply assert your needs, she freezes you out. The absence of affection feels unbearable, especially if you value deep emotional connection. That's how she gets you to police yourself, to stay quiet, and to give in. Not because she demanded it outright, but because she trained you to fear her withdrawal. For INFJs, this form of gaslighting cuts even deeper. You thrive on emotional connection and subtle exchanges of warmth. When that's taken away, it doesn't just feel like rejection, it feels like abandonment. You start spiraling inward, dissecting your own words and behaviors, trying to figure out how to repair something that shouldn't have been broken in the first place. That self-blame keeps you trapped. What makes this tactic especially cruel is the way she reintroduces affection once you bend back into her control. The moment you apologize unnecessarily or give in to her demands, the warmth suddenly returns. It feels like relief, almost like the sun breaking through clouds after days of rain. But that cycle isn't love. It's manipulation. It's intermittent reinforcement, a psychological strategy proven to create the strongest emotional bonds because your brain learns to chase the high of approval while ignoring the red flags in between. Over time, this dynamic erodes your self-worth. You stop asking for what you need because you've learned that needs come with punishment. You silence your voice to avoid another round of cold detachment. And eventually, you may start to confuse her inconsistent affection with genuine love, not realizing you're being trained to settle for scraps. But INFJs eventually catch on. You start noticing that the affection never really returns fully. It only comes back enough to keep you hooked. You realize that real connection doesn't vanish the moment you assert yourself, and you understand that withholding warmth isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of her need for control. That awareness breaks the spell. The very thing she uses to control you becomes the evidence you need to walk away. 6. Redefining reality through subtle lies. One of the most insidious gaslighting tactics female narcissists rely on is the slow, almost invisible art of redefining reality. Unlike blatant lying, which is easier to catch, this method creeps in through half-truths, omissions, and subtle twists. She doesn't have to rewrite your entire world overnight. She only has to nudge the narrative little by little until you begin doubting your own memory, perception, and instinct. Imagine you clearly remember something she said in an argument, maybe a promise, a criticism, or a boundary she crossed. When you bring it up, she insists, "That's not what I said, you're twisting my words." Or worse, she acts confused, tilts her head, and tells you she doesn't remember ever saying it at all. Now you're caught in a mental loop. Did I mishear her? Did I exaggerate it in my head? Am I overreacting? The moment you start questioning your own recollection, she's already succeeded. This tactic works because it's not just about one lie, it's about rewriting the entire history of the relationship in her favor. Over time, she reframes stories so she's always the victim and you're always the one who caused the issue. She'll forget her broken promises, but vividly remember your smallest mistakes. She'll downplay her betrayals, but exaggerate your reactions to them. And because she does it so smoothly, you begin to feel like she must be right. For INFJs, this tactic cuts deep. You have a strong memory for patterns and details, but you also value harmony. That means when someone challenges your recollection with confidence, you may choose peace over confrontation, even if it leaves you unsettled. The narcissist knows this. She counts on your reluctance to argue every point. By the time you realize how much the narrative has shifted, you're living in a version of events that barely resembles the truth you once knew. What makes this tactic especially damaging is the erosion of self-trust. When you can't rely on your own memory or judgment, you start leaning on hers. She becomes the keeper of truth, and you defer to her perspective even when it feels off. That dependency cements her control. You're less likely to challenge her in the future because you're unsure whether your mind can be trusted. But here's where INFJs eventually break free. Your intuition doesn't forget. Even when the words and stories have been twisted, your gut keeps whispering that something is wrong. You may not be able to articulate it right away, but the unease builds until you can no longer ignore it. And when you finally step back and compare the patterns, you realize the truth she's been selling you is nothing but smoke and mirrors. That moment of clarity, when you reclaim your reality, is the beginning of her losing her grip. 7. Turning others against you, triangulation. Perhaps one of the most destructive weapons in the female narcissist's arsenal is triangulation. This subtle but powerful act of turning other people against you instead of confronting you directly. She creates a triangle where a third person, maybe a friend, coworker, family member, or even someone you barely know, becomes her silent ally. She doesn't need to shout or openly attack you. All she has to do is plant seeds of doubt in other people's minds, then sit back and watch as the social fabric around you begins to unravel. Picture this. You've been in conflict with her, and instead of resolving it privately, she tells someone else, "I don't know what's wrong with them, but they've been so unstable lately." Or she frames herself as the victim. "I tried to help, but they just keep overreacting." Suddenly, you notice people treating you differently, pulling away, or even questioning your side of the story before you've had the chance to speak. That's triangulation in action, a slow poisoning of your reputation that leaves you feeling isolated and outnumbered. What makes this tactic so damaging is that it doesn't just target your relationship with her, it targets your relationship with the people around you. It erodes your support system. Friends you once trusted now second guess you. Family members you relied on begin siding with her because she's framed her narrative first. By the time you realize what's happening, you're not just fighting her, you're fighting the perception she has created of you in everyone else's mind. For INFJs, this hits especially hard. You thrive on deep, meaningful connections, and when those are poisoned by lies or manipulations, it feels like the ground has been ripped out from under you. You might try to defend yourself, but the more you explain, the more it looks like you're protesting too much. And the narcissist counts on this. She knows that the harder you try to prove yourself, the guiltier you appear in other people's eyes. But here's the part she underestimates. INFJs notice patterns others overlook. Even when the circle around you shifts, you can sense the strings being pulled in the background. Over time, the inconsistencies pile up. You see how her stories never quite match, how her victimhood always seems rehearsed, and how her alliances change depending on who gives her the most validation. And once you see the pattern, you stop playing the game. You no longer waste energy trying to defend yourself in a court where she is the judge, jury, and executioner. Instead, you quietly withdraw your trust, rebuild your connections with people who genuinely see you, and let her house of cards collapse on its own. This stage of manipulation often marks a turning point. It's when you stop asking, "Why don't they believe me?" and start asking, "Why am I still giving her this much power over my life?" And the moment you shift that question, the hold of triangulation begins to break. 8. Withholding love and approval as punishment. One of the most painful gaslighting tactics a female narcissist uses isn't loud or obvious at all. It's silent, cold, and calculated. Instead of shouting or openly fighting, she withdraws the very things you value most in the relationship: love, attention, and approval. One day she's warm, affectionate, and engaging, and the next she's distant, dismissive, and acts like you don't exist. She doesn't explain why, and she doesn't have to. That silence, that emotional freeze out, is designed to make you panic and chase after her just to get back to normal. This tactic works so well because it weaponizes one of the most basic human needs: connection. Everyone wants to feel seen and valued, but for INFJs especially, emotional intimacy is sacred. When someone who once gave you closeness suddenly withholds it, it feels like you've done something terribly wrong, even when you haven't. The narcissist counts on this. She wants you to second-guess yourself, retrace every word you said, and wonder if you're the one who caused the shift. She trains you to believe that her love is conditional and that keeping her approval requires constant effort on your part. Over time, this pattern leaves you walking on eggshells. You start monitoring your own tone, your own needs, even your own joy, because you fear that one wrong move will send her back into icy silence. And the cruelest part is that when she finally forgives you by offering affection again, it feels like a reward. You don't see it as manipulation, you see it as relief. That cycle of punishment and reward keeps you trapped because you become addicted to earning back the love she deliberately withholds. But here's where the INFJ perspective breaks the cycle. You eventually realize that true love, true care is never conditional. It doesn't vanish when you make a mistake, and it doesn't need to be earned by sacrificing your peace. You start to see the pattern not as evidence of your failures, but as evidence of her control. And once you recognize that, the fear starts to fade. Instead of chasing after withheld affection, you choose self-respect over approval. You stop craving scraps of love from someone who uses it as a leash, and you begin to rebuild your strength from within. This is often the final piece that makes the entire gaslighting system collapse, because when withholding no longer makes you beg, when the cold shoulder no longer makes you desperate, she loses her most powerful form of control. And for INFJs, that moment of clarity isn't just liberation, it's transformation. It's when you finally understand that your worth was never in her approval, but in the boundaries you set to protect yourself. If you've made it this far, it means you've recognized how deeply these tactics affect you. And that recognition itself is the beginning of freedom. Gaslighting only works when you doubt your own perception. And the fact that you're here, listening, and learning means you're already untangling the lies that were designed to keep you small. You deserve relationships where love isn't conditional, where truth isn't twisted, and where silence isn't used as punishment. So if this video gave you clarity, don't just let it pass by. Subscribe and stay with this channel because every week we break down the patterns narcissists use so you can see them clearly, step out of the fog, and take your power back. And before you go, let me ask you, which of these gaslighting tactics hit you the hardest? And how did you finally start seeing through it? Share your experience in the comments because your story could be the one that helps someone else finally see the truth.